Before his death at the age of 96, Robert Clary, the beloved French actor best known as Corporal Louis Lebeau on Hogan's Heroes, finally opened up about a dark chapter that had haunted Hollywood for decades: the brutal, unsolved murder of his co-star Bob Crane. The world had long speculated, theorized, and whispered about what really happened on that June night in 1978, when Crane was found bludgeoned to death in his Scottsdale, Arizona apartment. But Clary, who had kept mostly silent for over 40 years, carried memories and truths that had never made it to public ears. Until the very end. As the last surviving principal cast member of Hogan's Heroes, Robert Clary didn't just take his final bow as an actor. He lifted the curtain on a mystery that fans and investigators alike never truly solved. What did Clary know? Who did he suspect? And what secrets did he keep buried until the final years of his life? What you're about to hear is not tabloid speculation. These are the raw, unfiltered revelations of a man who saw it all, who worked beside Bob Crane day after day, and witnessed the slow unraveling of a life that would end in shocking tragedy. This is the story Robert Clary took to his grave. Almost. In the mid-1960s, Hogan's Heroes became an unexpected television phenomenon. Set in a World War II German POW camp, it somehow blended slapstick comedy with wartime tension, and the chemistry between the cast was undeniable. At the heart of it were two key figures: Bob Crane, the charming and magnetic leading man, and Robert Clary, the diminutive yet fiery Frenchman with a tragic past of surviving Nazi concentration camps. Their on-screen camaraderie wasn't just acting. It reflected a genuine off-screen bond that few knew was as complicated as it was close. Clary once said that Crane had a light about him, a presence that lit up every room. But behind that light was a growing darkness. Crane was affable, a family man on the surface, but, as Clary would later reveal, he lived a double life. Clary never judged him, at least not publicly. He often deflected questions about Crane's well-known addictions to pornography, his obsession with videotaping intimate encounters, and the strange friendship he had with a man named John Henry Carpenter, an electronics expert with shadowy motives. Still, Clary couldn't ignore the tension that grew during the final seasons of Hogan's Heroes, as Crane's private life began to overshadow his professional one. In interviews late in life, Clary spoke candidly about how the mood on set shifted. Crane, who was once energetic and focused, had become distracted. "There were times he wasn't really there," Clary once said, "like he was somewhere else, somewhere darker." Though Clary respected Crane's talent and charm, he didn't deny there was a kind of recklessness creeping into his friend's behavior. "He was playing with fire," Clary later admitted, "and he didn't care who got burned." When Hogan's Heroes ended in 1971, the cast went their separate ways, but Clary and Crane occasionally kept in touch. Clary was always wary of Carpenter, who seemed to have an unnatural hold on Crane. "There was something not right about that man," Clary said in a 2012 interview. "Bob trusted him too much. He let him into every part of his life, even the parts that should have stayed private." Though Clary stopped short of outright accusing Carpenter, his words painted a picture of growing concern and unspoken fear. For years, Clary avoided talking about Crane's murder. He hated the sensationalism, the tabloids, and the media circus that followed. But as he grew older and his own mortality loomed, he began to realize that staying silent may have done more harm than good. In the final interviews before his death, Clary made it clear he believed the truth about Bob Crane's death had been obscured not just by poor investigation, but by people who never wanted it solved. And what haunted him most was that the man he once called a friend had been reduced to a tragic headline, rather than remembered for the laughter he brought to millions. June 29, 1978, Scottsdale, Arizona. What should have been a quiet morning at the Winfield Place Apartments turned into a grisly media frenzy. Bob Crane, then 49 years old and still trying to revive his once glittering television career, was found bludgeoned to death in his bed. The weapon was never found, but investigators believed it was a camera tripod, fitting and ironic, considering the role that cameras had come to play in Crane's increasingly troubled private life. The brutal nature of the murder stunned Hollywood and left many of his friends, including Robert Clary, in a state of disbelief and quiet horror. The apartment itself was a disturbing scene. There was no sign of forced entry, no signs of a robbery gone wrong. Instead, it appeared intimate, like someone close to Crane had entered while he slept or had been welcomed in without suspicion. Blood spatter covered the walls, and the blow to Crane's head had been fatal. Investigators quickly turned their attention to John Henry Carpenter, Crane's closest companion in his secret double life. Carpenter was known to have been with Crane the night before, dining with him at a local restaurant. He was also staying nearby, but without physical evidence tying him to the crime, the case quickly stalled. Robert Clary was devastated when he heard the news. In the few public statements he made at the time, his sorrow was obvious, but he remained cautious. "This was not the Bob I knew," he said. "He made mistakes, yes, but no one deserves to die like that." For years, Clary kept his thoughts about the crime to himself. It wasn't fear, it was disappointment, pain, and a sense that justice had never truly been served. He watched as Crane's name was dragged through the mud, more often associated with sex, tapes, and salacious headlines than with his groundbreaking work on television. Clary's frustration grew in the 1990s when the case was reopened and Carpenter was finally tried for Crane's murder in 1994, over 16 years after the crime. The trial was a spectacle. Old friends were called to testify, tapes were shown, and yet the prosecution had little in the way of hard evidence. Despite the circumstantial links, Carpenter's odd behavior, the tension in their relationship, and the blood smear found in his rental car, he was acquitted. And just like that, Bob Crane's murder was legally unresolved, again. Robert Clary, who watched the trial from a distance, later said he wasn't surprised. It was too late. Too much time had passed. The truth got buried with the evidence. In the final years of his life, Clary began to speak more openly. In a rare interview recorded just months before his passing, he said something chilling. The truth was always there. It just wasn't convenient. He didn't name Carpenter directly, but he didn't have to. Clary described a toxic dynamic between Crane and Carpenter, one where dependency blurred into manipulation. Bob couldn't say no to him, Clary admitted. And by the end, I think he wanted out. But it was too late. When asked if he thought the case would ever be solved, Clary paused and said, "We all know what happened. The question is why no one did anything." For Robert Clary, the murder wasn't just a tragedy. It was a betrayal of everything they had built together on Hogan's Heroes. The laughter, the camaraderie, the brotherhood. It all ended in a single night of violence that never made sense. And what haunted Clary the most was that Bob Crane died not as a beloved TV star, but as a tabloid cautionary tale. He deserved better, Clary said. We all did. In the years following Bob Crane's violent death, one thing became increasingly clear. This wasn't just a murder. It was a mirror reflecting the darkest corners of celebrity culture. And behind that mirror were secrets so disturbing that many simply chose to look away. But Robert Clary never forgot. As time passed and former colleagues passed on, Clary remained one of the last people who truly knew the full scope of Crane's descent. In his final interviews, he hinted at what so many refused to say out loud. Bob Crane's life had become a dangerous intersection of fame, addiction, and exploitation. And there were powerful people who wanted that truth buried. Throughout the 1970s, Crane's public image was still tethered to the clean-cut, quick-witted Colonel Hogan, but his private life was spinning out of control. With John Carpenter at his side, Crane dove headfirst into the underground world of sex, voyeurism, and videotape obsession. Together they rigged hotel rooms with recording equipment, filmed countless encounters, often without the full consent of those involved, and built a disturbing archive that painted a completely different portrait of Crane than what America had seen on their TV screens. Clary knew about this world, though he never participated in it. He didn't condone it, but he understood how fame could twist a man. Bob was lonely, even when surrounded by people, Clary once said. He was chasing something, maybe love, maybe just distraction. But what he found was poison. What made the situation worse was how many people in the entertainment industry turned a blind eye. According to Clary, there were whispers on set even during the heyday of Hogan's Heroes. Some crew members had heard about Crane's peculiar habits, while others noticed how Carpenter always lingered in the background, offering tech help while inserting himself into Crane's personal affairs. It was obvious to anyone paying attention that Bob was being used, Clary said. But no one wanted to confront it. Not the studios, not the agents, not even the friends who should have cared. Carpenter, who worked for a company that installed early home video equipment,
had become enabler, handler, and gatekeeper
to a hidden life that would ultimately lead to Crane's destruction. Clary believed that the tapes themselves were the key, both to understanding Crane's unraveling and to unlocking the motive behind his murder. He was starting to talk about cleaning up, walking away from that life, Clary revealed. And maybe that scared someone. Rumors had circulated that Crane had considered cutting ties with Carpenter shortly before his death. Some said he was planning to go public with his regrets. Others believed he was being blackmailed. What Clary made clear was that Crane wasn't entirely in control by the time of his death. He wasn't just a victim of murder, Clary said. He was a victim of silence, his own and everyone else's. What's most tragic is that the very industry that had elevated Bob Crane chose to distance itself from him the moment scandal hit. Hollywood, always eager to protect its image, erased him from the conversation. Studios refused to revisit Hogan's heroes. Syndication slowed, and Crane's legacy was left in limbo. Clary resented this. They acted like he never existed, he said. But he gave his heart to that show, to that audience. And he made mistakes, yes, but he wasn't a monster. He was a man in pain. Near the end of his life, Robert Clary made peace with many things. His traumatic past in the Holocaust, his long career in television, even the fame that both rewarded and isolated him. But the one thing he never fully accepted was how Bob Crane's story ended, not just in violence, but in shameful erasure. There's a lot people didn't want to know, Clary said softly. But I knew. I saw it coming, and I'll never forget it. As Robert Clary neared the end of his life, his reflections grew deeper, more vulnerable, and far more revealing. He had outlived nearly every member of the Hogan's Heroes cast. He had survived the Holocaust, rebuilt his life in America, and carved out a decades-long career in the entertainment industry. But the one shadow that never fully left him was Bob Crane. In private conversations and rare interviews during his final years, Clary did what he hadn't done in decades. He opened his heart. And what came out wasn't just grief or bitterness, but a haunting combination of guilt, sadness, and the urgent need to tell the truth, before it was too late. To Clary, Crane was never just another co-star. There was a time when they were brothers in arms, both on and off screen. We laughed so much on that set, Clary remembered. There was such chemistry, such rhythm. Bob was a natural leader, not just in front of the camera, but behind it too. He made everyone feel like they belonged. But Clary also admitted that, by the end of the series, he began to see a different man, one who was increasingly lost, chasing validation in the wrong places, and surrounded by people who didn't have his best interests at heart. Fame is a drug, Clary said. And Bob was hooked. In his last major interview, Clary said something that stunned even those who had known him for years. I should have said something sooner. It was a simple sentence, but it carried the weight of decades. He explained how he had seen the signs, sensed the darkness creeping into Crane's world, but chose to keep his distance out of fear and frustration. We weren't that close at the end, Clary admitted. I had my own demons. I didn't want to get pulled into his, but that doesn't mean I didn't care. I cared deeply. Clary had always refused to sensationalize Bob Crane's murder. He declined participation in documentaries, turned down most interviews, and avoided public commentary until the final years. But as his own health declined, he felt a responsibility to offer clarity, if not closure. In one of his final public statements, Clary said, "The world turned Bob into a punchline. That's not fair. That's not who he was. He was brilliant. He was kind. He was troubled, yes, but he was still human." These weren't rehearsed lines. They were the words of a man who had lived too long with regret. Privately, Clary believed the case would never be solved, at least not in a courtroom. Too much evidence had been lost. Too many witnesses were gone, but in his mind, and in the minds of many who worked closely with Crane, the truth had always been painfully obvious. "He trusted the wrong person," Clary said. "And he paid the ultimate price." But more than anything, Clary wanted people to remember the good in Crane, the performer who made millions laugh, the friend who brought light into dark places, the man who wasn't defined by the worst night of his life. On November 16, 2022, Robert Clary passed away peacefully in his Beverly Hills home. He was 96. With him went one of the last living links to Bob Crane's golden years, one of the only people who had known both the man and the myth. But before he left, Clary made sure to leave behind the truth. Not the whole truth, perhaps, but the part he could no longer keep buried. His final words about Crane weren't filled with anger or judgment. Instead, they echoed with the mournful wisdom of someone who had seen too much, endured too much, and finally found the strength to speak. "Bob wasn't perfect," Clary whispered. "But none of us are. He didn't deserve what happened to him. And he didn't deserve to be forgotten.